So we're here to solve this crosses streams inverted puzzle by JinHoo. It's got a groups theme. All the rows or columns that have numbered clues will always be the same number if multiple appear. And one of the things that stands out are these 3 question mark clues. It's still got a lot of stuff to fill in. We'll often sort of start by just visualizing like a leftmost packing. You'll see that the threes are going to take cells like this. And if we move to a rightmost packing, there are 2 cells in common that for sure will be part of them. And while we don't know what the last one is, it looks like I do have edge helper turned on. We'll know that there are conversions between states in the cells that I just marked with an X. That if the 3 is over to the right, there's a space where there's some gap here, and maybe this gap isn't known for sure, but at least visually it's helpful to have some boundaries around these 3s. And coming to this vertical column that also has 3 question mark. If the question mark extends all the way here, notice that there aren't enough spaces to get 2 more 3s up top. So this cell that we've marked in here in green is part of a vertical 3, so these are known for sure. Take advantage of this clue. And a top 3 is going to be coming through this cell. Since the things we just filled in have limited some of the spaces to the right, where this row and this row need to have 2 or 3 in the first unshaded group. That means the rightmost column couldn't be unshaded after we'd marked these cells in black. We now have a case where this row has 3s to place, and whether right padding or left padding, we see that we get these 4 cells that are going to be part of all the shadings of those groups and give us some starting point here for the grid. One thing I'm seeing that's starting to set up is that we've got these black edges that may connect, but let's show you why they have to connect. The only other way this gets to the rest of the grid is coming over here to the right side, and doing that is going to take too many cells away from this row, which needs to have 2, 3 large groups, so they would have to come together. So we've got a case where we know for sure we come up here, and doing that we mark this row completely, and doing that we even mark some things about this row completely. Notice that we have to fill one of these cells near this X as a shaded cell. The only way it connects into the rest of the grid is coming to the right, and in doing that we're going to get this shape as a requirement in the grid, and these cells that are shaded have to keep coming up to extend further through. So that's a great start for the grid. We're going to have a case where, let's just mark off clues we finished. This 3 column will need to take at least these 3 cells and then 2 more up here to really work out. This looks like it's going to set up some particular constraints here where this row actually has just exactly the right amount of space for what's left to fill in. So we'll put that into the grid. We have 2 question mark, and that's going to be something like this, or coming down. So we've got a case where we've got one known cell for sure, which is this green one in this edge. We have the column just to the left of it, it's got 2 2s, and only 1 2 can be in this space, and a second 2 can be down here. We actually have marked something as too large, so that's a 2. These cells are both shaded. Let's not forget, in a cross the streams puzzle, we can't have 4 shaded cells in a 2 by 2 square, so we'll just mark this in, which is logically required, and get a point like this in the grid. This looks pretty good. We have to get, in some of these rows, like this 7th row, we need to get 2 single 1s into the grid, and this cell has to be marked off for that to be true, and actually because of this column, this also has to be marked off for that to work. We actually have some more constraints, like this column has to have a 1 and a 1, so it's going to need to have like an alternating pattern up top, but this will be the question mark. But actually the bigger issue is going to be over here. We need to have an unknown, and then a singleton, and then a singleton, and this looks very good. But notice that if this were not part of the lower one, there's no other place to put another one below it in the grid. So this is actually forced. And this now, again, avoiding a 2 by 2 square, that based on the one to the left, we now need to avoid another 2 by 2 square. we've got 3 unshaded groups, so it's got to come like this. And we've got a good start. This is to keep connected, this is to keep connected so that the shaded cells come through. We're going to have this cell unshaded to let the 2 by 2 make sense. So let's now come and think about how maybe these go. And one thing to note is that with 2 cells shaded here, we're not going to form both parts of this as a shaded group. So I think there's a way to say it's not the case that both of these are unshaded. And so one of these at the very least is shaded. And let's just consider what will happen in certain scenarios for this. One thing to see is that for sure, if this bottom cell is marked as unshaded, we've forced a connectivity issue around the grid like this. And that looks pretty good, like that's still a reasonable path. But I'm wondering if the alternative is going to force a challenge. And so here's the alternative, where we take this cell as shaded, it forces 3 above, it based on the 2 by 2 rule puts these 2 cells as unshaded to the right. And we get to where we've got a situation like this, where we have another shaded cell up here in the upper left, but it's not going anywhere. And so to stay connected, it looks like this cell wants to be not shaded, but the opposite. And we're going to come around like so. We've got to get 3 cells here. This has to be shaded for connectivity. In this column, we need a single white, which actually means in this row, we need a single white for this clue. Those all look good. We've got this too. We've got these cells filled in. We have some connections still to be making, so let's sort of think through this. We've got the question mark 1, 1. If we put that into the grid, we need to get sufficient space to get another unknown in here. And so what does this mean? For this to have 2 distinct groups, we need to have another shaded group that starts here, but that means we need to have a shaded cell that's in one of these spaces. So for sure we need this to be shaded. If not, there's no way to get a shade and unshade that's still going to work. So this is shaded and comes down. And that now is going to mean that we also, to have another unshaded here, this has to come down. So we get a 2 by 2 square avoidance, which will force this, which puts an unused cell there to fulfill the 2 clue. This is shaded, so these all look good. We shade this clue to fulfill this. So all the clues right now are looking good. We need to be connected, and we also need to put one more unshaded group in this row. If I took this cell, that marks this unshaded by 2 by 2, but also shades there. So this would be bad to shade, so we've got to come up. And this stays to be connected, and the very last cell must be shaded because we only have one unshaded group in this column. And that finishes out the inverted side of this puzzle. And hopefully you got a bit of a sense of how to use the cross the streams rules, even in this inverted mode, to be flipping the large numbers, get partial fills, that where you can't completely put in question mark 3, 3, in this row, we could be marking these cells as par 3s and these cells as par 3s, and then those worked. And there's this balance of going from the rows to the columns that you'll keep doing in this style. So hope you learn a little bit about this variation. If you want to stick around, we'll talk through the Easter egg for this week and for this puzzle. If not, if you haven't found it yet, this would be a great time to leave the video and come back after you've looked through. But there is something special going on in each of the 6 puzzles of this week, and we'll jump into that in just a few seconds. So now if the audience were ready for the spoilers, all the puzzles here are able to be solved if you ignore the variation. And we often like having classic puzzles on Grandmaster Puzzles, and that's the gimmick in part for this week, is that the classic styles still work out. And a lot of this puzzle solving path, at least at the start, goes the same way. We focused on this row and said we might have a 1 and a 3 and a 3, and it turns out that the same way we would get these cells as for sure marked and get helpers here. That's still true. This still has to play out like this. We've just changed the meaning of black and white for these clues, but we've got the first one's marked. The only way that we get 3 still in this column must have the bottom one here, and the other one can't start all the way up here because we couldn't come through and form a 2 by 2 square. So it's got to be in these cells, and that's at least that starting point. We now again, when we first went through this, shifted over to looking at the rows, and like this 3 coming to the left, something we could mark in. Again, we're going to avoid the 2 by 2 constraint in doing this. Here we actually get some quick progress because we've now actually marked the single shaded group in the cell and put things around it, so we can clear that out. We've marked this in, so we'll put those spaces around. This row's got 2, and we want no 2 by 2. We have 2 shaded groups, so everything above this will not be part of next shading. We have question mark 2, 2 to put in here, and we talked before about how 4 cells in a group can only take a single one of these, so we need to have a 2 and then something else, and so that's got to be up top. And for connection, it looks like we're going to have some constraints here that will force a particular path. Here's where it's going to be a 2 going there, forces this, forces a 3. Now this shaded group here has to come down to this row, or it's not going to be able to stay connected. These 2 groups are separately marked, so we've got this all good in the grid. These are marked in the grid. We have 3 to be placing with a single question mark. That's now there. Avoid the 2 by 2. That's now there. This bottom row still needs a single cell, so put it in. That looks good. We've got to figure out how to get into this middle space, and some of that is going to be recognizing we've got to get out of this little wedge here, and this question mark 1, 1 row is going to be pretty constraining. It actually means there's only one more cell to take, and it's going to have to take a path straight up some channel here. But let's start by seeing first we've got this 1, 1, and then asterisks, so the start of this has to have a 1, 1, which would look like this. In the last version of the puzzle, this question mark 1, 1, 1 was constraining, and it still is. It's the same thing as before. The top 3rd and 5th rows are going to be part of the question 1, 1. The bottom is not. This now is going to be the single channel that gets into the top of the grid, so we'll mark this in. We've got a question mark 2, 2. That's got to look like this based on what we have shaded. This then has to stay coming up this left column to give us connections through the grid. We've got 2 single ditches to place here. We've got the question mark below, but we don't yet have these. For connection, notice that shading this cell would force this cell and force these to be unused, but that now breaks the connectivity in the grid. So the topmost row has a cell used in it. We don't necessarily know if it's this or this yet, but we can figure out what it probably has to be soon by seeing that we have to get another shaded group here, but with an unshaded cell to the left of it. And that constraint is going to come together with, it looks like probably a constraint like getting 3 in this space to force things pretty quickly. Let's sort of do it like this. To get 2 up top, a really limiting force would be if we took this cell. And we took that cell, we're going to have to take this cell, which will take 2, take this cell, which takes 2, take this cell, which does this, and now we connect back to the left. And note that if we didn't use that path, we would still be connecting back to the left. So in both situations, this connection is happening in the grid, and that will give us a little bit of the connectivity we need. Coming back to the option that looked like this, one thing that you would be forcing for sure is this shape, and that now, to make this row work out, we've got 3 shaded groups, but we also have an unshaded group. We've isolated something. And so there's something I probably missed in doing quickly, but shading this in forces this isolated pattern, and that will suggest that keeping that unshaded is the right way to go. We still need to get this question mark, question mark, question mark to work out, so it's going to look like this. We have to get 2 in the space, but it's not going to be these cells. It's going to look like this. This wants to have particular question mark 2. This has a few ways it could go, but notice that in one of the ways, it's going to be taking too many cells. Actually, the real issue is these clues. In this way, it would be taking a single cell before it takes 2 discrete blocks of 2, so this is no good. And in marking that in for connection, we need to take this, and that marks that off. So A little bit of a roundabout path, but it used similar kinds of steps in many places as the inverted version of this puzzle. But we've got through both of the crosses streams and another example of a two-way solving puzzle that's pretty good and fun to solve in both the directions. So thanks, JinHoo, for all the puzzles this week, and we'll see you again soon.